nobody stop what the Most High put together. We gon' see. In times. Serpents lurking, watchers watching, Yasharala stay on point. They lurking. We under the covenant, we ain't got no other choice. Gird your loins up, armor up, cause it's time for war. We the generation that's gon' get on one accord. Serpents lurking, watchers watching, Yasharala stay on point. We under the covenant, we ain't got no other choice. Gird your loins up, armor up, cause it's time for war.
So I'm going to share some information from sources you want to add to your arsenal. So be sure to take notes. We're going to be covering information from the book Hebrewisms of West Africa from Nile to Niger with the Jews. And I have a link here for a PDF copy of this book. And it has valid and substantial merit in showing, how the black Jews, how they made their way into West Africa. And this was written in the 1930s by Joseph Williams. And this book is now in the public domain. All right, the other thing I'll be doing is sharing portions of the book, The Hebrew Heritage of Our West African Ancestors. This book was written by Stephen Jacobs and Dr. Rudolph Windsor. Some of you may be familiar with the other book written by Dr. Windsor, From Babylon to Timbuktu. So in this book, The Hebrew Heritage of Our West African Ancestors, they are sharing their editorial comments of the book, Hebrewisms of West Africa. And as I said, I will use my DNA results to reflect the migration pattern of the Bantu people. So they start by asking the question, are Black Americans the descendants of West African Hebrews? This question is answered in the affirmative with a resounding yes by Professor Joseph J. Williams after more than 11 years of intensive research into the subject. In his book entitled Hebrewisms of West Africa, this eminent cultural anthropologist documents the origins and extent of the Hebrew religion and culture in that part of West Africa, which is the ancestral home of most Black Americans. His book has 443 pages. It is documented with more than 1,400 footnotes. In reality, it is a compendium or a collection of very nearly every major treatise on the subject. Professor Williams cites over 900 different scholars and eyewitnesses in this encyclopedic effort. And I'll drop down to the last section. It says, for those unacquainted with Professor Williams, his scholarly credentials are beyond dispute. Besides devoting 11 years of research to this one subject, he held doctoral degrees in history and cultural anthropology. He was a fellow in the British Royal Geographical Society and the American Geographical Society. He was a member of the International Institute of African Languages and Culture. He was a member of the Catholic Anthropological Conference, and he was the author of several books on Black civilization and culture in Africa and the West Indies. So how much more would we need to know to say that, yeah, this man certainly would have the qualifications? So let's dig into this. Okay, beginning at the second paragraph, they say, there is a famous old saying, a rose is a rose by any other name. This means that a rose still is a rose no matter what name it is given. We who live in America are accustomed to thinking in terms of the European cultural standards which prevail. Even the Black man thinks of himself by his European names, Negro, which is Spanish, or colored, or black, which are English words. Rarely, if ever, does he think of himself as Fanti or Ashanti or Fulani or Ghanaian. In this same sense, an Israelite is an Israelite by any other name, because most of us are accustomed to hearing the word Jew and associating this word with white faces. It is surprising to many that Black people also claim a Hebrew heritage. This common misimpression, however, is largely due to the kind of cultural conditioning which our European-oriented society is imbued. It's a mouthful, and he's absolutely correct. Let's keep going. All right, so as I said, a lot of information to cover here, so hang in there with me. You definitely want this information. It says, contemporary recorded Israelite history is likewise almost exclusively of white Jewish and white Gentile origin. The result has been not so much errors of commission as errors of omission. In other words, the major shortcomings of European-oriented histories of Africa and the Middle East are largely what is omitted. All right, I'll drop down. It says, the bias in our knowledge of history is reflected by the fact that very few, if any, standard textbooks deal extensively with the relationships between early Christianity and the pagan Greco-Roman religions. For example, that's the linchpin right there. It says very few, if any, standard textbooks discuss the fact that most white Jews are descendants of Greeks, Romans, Armenians, and others who adopted Judaism as their religion during the period of its greatest expansion in the Mediterranean areas. Very few, if any, textbooks deal with the fact that Black Dravidians inhabited the region contiguous with the Middle East until white Aryans pushed them into the southern half of the Indian Peninsula. It says Professor Williams's book does not attempt to deal at length with every omission by white historians. He does, however, provide us with many scholarly insights so that we, the readers, can enjoy a better balanced picture of history, especially African history.
We talked last time about the Hebrews of East Africa, and now we're going to talk about the Hebrews of West Africa. So this one is very interesting to me personally because, of course, the connection as far as closeness, as far as time, as far as distance between West Africa and East Africa is completely different. Meaning the people, the Hebrews who were driven all the way to the west would have had to go a long way in order to get on that side of the continent. And because of that, we have to try to understand why. As we've spoken about, the Bantu dispersion seems to be the way from which many Hebrews who are coming out of East Africa, coming out of ancient Yasharel, are basically spreading to different parts of Africa because, as we know, the Bantus themselves spread literally all over the continent of Africa. Similarly, you see a relationship between those Hebrews who are leaving from East Africa, and you see a relationship with the Bantus to the point where many people who we can identify as being Hebrews are also Bantu speakers. So that's very interesting in itself. So we're now on the western coast of Africa. There's a number of tribes, again, who would probably fit the standard or fit the criteria as being Hebrew. As I said in the last video, one of the things you want to look for is an origin story that's pointing to this Ethiopia region. When people have that origin story, they're telling you, even if they don't know, that they're probably of Yasharel. Obviously, also you want to look for a cultural linguistic connection to the original Hebrews. And also you want to look to a people who are going to, unfortunately, have a paganized version of Torah practices that have been paganized over time. So these are all testaments to the fact that these people would have been the original Hebrews. Now, one study that I was able to find that was very interesting is a study that found that the Yoruba were actually 99.9% genetically identical to the Igbos, the Akan, and the Ga-Dangme. So let's read from this article. It says, Adobwale et al. Made the shocking discovery that whereas there was 99.9% within population variance, that between population variance was less than 0.1%. This means that Yorubas, Igbos, Ga and Akan are 99.9% similar as populations, while within each of the groups there are differences and variations between individuals as high as 99%. One Igbo may be 99% variant to another Igbo, or one Yoruba to another Yoruba. In addition, these four ethnic groups have a long history of trade and other interactions, and they all speak languages belonging to the Niger Kordofanian group, as noted by Cavalli Saforza et al. The genetic relationship observed in West Africa indicate that major migrations and admixtures occurred within the region in earlier times. It is important to point out that despite the small amount of genetic differentiation in the sample as a whole, it was possible to distinguish between the groups from each country using a hierarchical AMOVA model and a dendrogram algorithm. So what this says to me, at least, is that these groups likely came to East Africa in a singular location, were likely a part of the same group at one time, although they later on branched off and obtained different types of practices, differentiations in language, but still from the same roots. So let's go through some of them individually. We're going to start with the Ashanti. A lot of overwhelming evidence that the Ashanti are Hebrew. In fact, there's an entire book about that I read, and the book goes into a lot of details. The book is called The Hebrew Heritage of Black Africa, and it's an interesting book because it was written by a Jewish person and also a man who I believe is a Hebrew Israelite. So they both combined in order to make the case that the Ashanti are actually Hebrews. Now, a lot of things in Ashanti point to their Hebrewness. One in particular is the Ashanti. Ashan is a Hebrew word. In fact, it is a tribe that was inside of Yahuda that was named Ashan. And the T part inside of West African languages is actually a way to say essentially the children of or the son of. So when the people say that I'm Ashanti, again, Ashan is Hebrew, I'm a son of Ashan, pointing to the fact that the Ashanti likely originated inside of a town or a part of the tribe of Yahuda. But again...
So again, the term Obia, found all throughout the Caribbean. Even in America, there's a form of Obia. All throughout South America and all throughout West Africa. It has biblical roots. King Saul goes and visits an Obia woman. Now, we're not saying that this was the right thing to do. So when we highlight that this is occurring among African tribes in West Africa, we're not applauding this. What we're actually saying is many of the heathen customs of the land followed our people throughout their historical migrations. Because remember, Israel was kicked out of the land because they did not keep the Torah. So as they're leaving the land, all of their pagan and occult practices are following them. So the first time you hear of an Obia woman is not in West Africa, and certainly not in the Caribbean. It's right in the Hebrew Bible.
But again, I said we have to look for the identifiable markers. One of the big markers is an origin story that's going to point to Ethiopia. So I'm reading from Conspiracy to Erase a Nation. It says the Hebrew identity of Ashanti has long been a topic of conversation. Joseph J. Williams in Hebrewisms of West Africa documents historians such as Andre Arkson in his assertion that from Ethiopia, Middle Egypt, and Central Sudan descended the Ashanti and the tribes known as Bantu. So this is very important to emphasize, from Ethiopia, Middle Egypt, and also Central Sudan. It goes on to say, similarly, Sir Harry Johnson was of the opinion that according to their language relations, the Ashanti group of Negroes once came from Niger north of Yorubaland and Borgu country. Lieutenant Colonial Makwa Ferryman insisted that Borgus' claim relationship with the Bornas and the Bornis are located in the south of Lake Chad. There is a far-reaching indication of the possible origin of the Ashanti. providing verification of a collective journey from the Nile Valley. So Professor Roland B. Dixon of Harvard said that the oldest strata in Africa are represented by the Mongoloid, that is round-headed, low-skulled, broad-nosed, and Proto-Australoid, that is long-headed, low-skulled, broad-nosed types. Speaking of the later classification, Professor Dixon calls attention to the fact that this type appears as an inconsiderable element in the Abyssinian Plateau and among the Ashanti of West Africa. Professor Dixon concluded that the Ashanti seem to be quite comparable to the late Chad group in the Sudan. This Negro immigration, he added, was in part a westerly drift from the Chad now area, and in part a direct southward movement from the Western Sudan in the Sahara borders, forced by the expansion in the Sahara region of the Caspian peoples who have poured into North Africa since very early times. Also, Steve Jacobs, he lists inside of the Hebrew heritage of Black Africa a number of different characteristics and observations that have been made about the Ashanti, including, number one, the Ashanti are an ethnic mixture of peoples of West Africa, the ancestral home of most African Americans, obviously. The Ashanti are closely related to the Fanti, Yoruba, Sudanese, and more distinctly to Bantu, whose combined population stretches fully across sub-Saharan Africa. So this goes back to that reality that the Bantu dispersion likely was the dispersion of the Hebrews and going into West Africa, who were included among the Bantu. The Ashanti tribe appeared to have migrated and later pushed westward by alien white invaders of European origin known as Berbers and Arabs. We talked about this already. The Ashanti appear to have spread from Chad, now region of Northeast Africa. And number four, the Ashanti and related peoples live in the very region near the west coast of Africa from which most Black African slaves were captured and transported. Hence, they are the ancestors of most African Americans today. And by the way, that's really much the case if you are from Jamaica. You definitely are Ashanti. There's a number of other Caribbean countries. I think Haiti also has a number of Ashanti heritage, and also many Ashanti were brought to North America. And so, yeah, a lot of us have Ashanti heritage. Now, going on to the traditions of the Ashanti that show their Hebrew attributes, I'm going to read from, again, Conspiracy to Erase a Nation. Culturally, the Ashanti have many Hebraic traditions as well. Similar to the Hebrew word for the law of Moses, Torah, in Ashanti culture, the lawgiver is referred to as Poro. The name of the god of the Ashantis is supreme being known as Enyame, to whom Saturday is dedicated. In addition, Williams, talking about Joseph Williams, lists a number of Hebrew feats of the Ashanti culture, including religious dances, the use of amen, vow value, a patriarchal system, the authority in a stool or chair, endogamy, cross-cousin marriages, familial names, exogamy, marriage rites, uncleanness after childbirth, the purification ceremony, menstrual seclusion, serial ablutions, and loanwords of Hebrew origin. Williams also noted Ashanti customs which were Abyssinian, citing Edward T. Edward Bowditch. The Ashanti is never presumed to speak, but through his ministers or interpreters, who invariably repeat his ordinary observations, however audible with the Abyssinian exordium, hear what the king says. In addition, the prefix Sai or Zai, the name of Ashanti kings, or a vestige of the Abyssinian Za or Zo prefix of shepherd kings, or the original Ethiopians. He also discusses that the Ashantis, like the Abyssinians and ancient Egyptians, never fight at night, not even after sunset, whatever advantage they may lose. The Ashanti also never fight on Saturday. This is even closer to Hebrew tradition than that of the Galas of Ethiopia, who never fight on Friday. Galas, by the way, are the Oromo, who I've told you all are the Hebrews of that particular region. So Jacob also talks about the Ashanti and the Bantu connection. It says, scholars believe there's a common origin for the Ashanti and Bantu peoples. They both came, it is thought, from the northeastern part of the African continent. The Ashantis eventually migrated to the west coast through parallel and the southern edge of the Sahara Desert. The Bantus, by contrast, moved mainly to south so that today they occupied nearly the entire southern half of the continent, from the Congo Republic in Zaire on the west to Mozambique on the east and southward to the very southernmost tip called the Cape of Hope. Ashantis are far from the only Bantu culture with a plenitude of Hebrewisms. However, what makes their case study different is the fact that Islam never gained influence over the Ashanti, either socially or politically. Meaning, inside of many Bantu cultures, many people could claim, who want to say that no Bantus are Hebrews or some Bantus aren't Hebrews, they could push back and saying, well, yeah, you have some Hebrewisms in your culture, but you got that not from the Bible, you got that not from the Hebrews, no, you got that from Islam. That's how they would push back. But the answer that the Ashantis would say is no, the Islamic military campaigns did not have that effect on our culture. So how else are you going to attribute the Hebrews on the side of the Ashanti culture? You can't. So we're now going to talk about the Yoruba. Something very interesting about the Yoruba is the name Yoruba.
That the term Yoruba is a Hebrew term. And I can tell you right now, that's original work. Nobody's book is talking about that. You can't go in this one's book, you can't go in this one's book. Nobody's talking about it. The term Yoruba, or the Yoruba tribes, that's a purely Hebrew term. The Yoruba peoples are named by the Husa, otherwise known as the Fulani. Let me show you something. I'm going to unshare my screen so you can see something live right now. Let me show you something real quick. I did pure original work for this one, y'all. Show your love. Former Minister of Culture, Femi Fani Kayode, started a healthy, matter of fact, let me bring it from the top. Bring it from the top. Okay? We're looking at Fulani and the origin of the names Yoruba and Yamiri. If you didn't already know this, scholars for the longest time have surmised that the Fulani tribes in West Africa migrated from Canaan land. Even the individual I mentioned earlier, Asar Imhotep from Sonata TV, he has a presentation on his channel right now where he also speaks of the Fulani being remnants of the Canaanite tribes in the land of Israel. That's highly significant then, because it's the Fulani that give the Oyo people their name. Before the people of Yoruba are known as the Yoruba, they're known as the Oyo clan or the Oyo tribe, O-Y-O, Oyo. The Fulani give them the name Yoruba because they felt that the Oyo clan were very mischievous. They felt that they were not honest. They felt that they were deceivers. They were adversarial towards the Fulani. The Fulani complained that the Oyo people were very shrewd in their business practices as merchants. So the Fulani said, I don't care about your name Oyo, we're going to call you Yoruba. And watch when y'all see the name that translates to right in the Hebrew Bible. Exactly the way the people of Fulani use it when they reference the Oyo people, who you know today as the Yoruba people. And by the way, let me just give you something really quick. Well, let me show you this before we do that. Former Minister of Culture, Femi Fani Kayode, started a healthy national conversation about the constructedness of collective identities in Nigeria, where he repudiated his Yoruba identity because he said the name owes etymological depths to the Fulani and that it has pejorative denotations and connotations. A pejorative name, guys, is an insulting name. For instance, the Ethiopian Jews they're known as the people of Yehuda or Beta Israel. There's a group among Ethiopians who are completely unrelated to them. They are aware that those Ethiopians don't have their origin in Ethiopia, but have their origin in the land of Israel. So they don't call them Beta Israel. They call them Falasha, which means exiled people in Amharic. The term Falasha is an Amharic term used to describe Ethiopian Jews by other ethnic Ethiopians who are unrelated to them as a pejorative term. So when we talk about a pejorative term, we're talking about a term that is not of endearment, but a term that smears, meant to smear someone. All right? It's a pejorative term. The Fulani are the ones who name these people Yoruba. Let me keep showing you right now. As I pointed out in my preliminary intervention on his claims on social media, the name Yoruba was first attested in a treatise by a 16th century Songhai Islamic scholar by the name Ahmad Baba to refer to the people of the ancient Oyo Empire, exactly as I said to you. Let me show you again. The name Yoruba was first attested in a treatise by a 16th century Songhai Islamic scholar by the name of Ahmad Baba to refer to the people of the ancient Oyo Empire, which included all of the present-day Oyo State, most of Osun State, and parts of Kawa, some western Nigerian states. So this is not the aboriginal name of the Yoruba people. The Yoruba people, they were known before then as the Oyo. They were part of what's called the Oyo Empire. But the Fulani, because of their interactions with them, they said, forget that Oyo name. We're going to call you Yoruba, which later came to me Yoruba. The term Yoruba denotes someone who's shrewd, denotes someone who is an antagonist. It denotes someone who is literally shrewd in business and has very, very bad social behavior. So they regarded them in a sense as even antagonists, which is highly significant in light of what I'm about to show you. Highly significant because the term literally means an adversary. So when the Fulani, who I want you to remember, the Fulani migrated from Canaan land. So if they migrated from Canaan land, what language do you think the Fulani speak? Hebrew. So when they named the Oyo people Yoruba, that's a Hebrew name. Don't believe me? Just watch this. The name Yoruba and its Hebrew origins. Yoruba came from the term Yariba, which the earliest Husa/Fulani that had conflict with the Oyo people called the Oyos. Then they saw the Oyo people as very cunning and not straightforward. Even the Ewe people, as Alan Robertson pointed out, shout out to you, also come from the Oyo. I'm going to say this again. Yoruba came from the term Yariba, which the earliest Fulani that had conflict with the Oyo people called the Oyos. Then they saw the Oyo people as very cunning and not straightforward. Citation. This is from the book Perspectives on Africa, page 88. Perspectives on Africa, page 88. Let's look at a reference in the Bible to that very same term. In Psalms 35, verse 1, it says, O Lord, strive with my adversaries. Give battle to my foes. Well, what do you think the word for adversary is in this passage? Yariba, just as the Fulani call the Oyo people the same exact damn word. Yariba. Yariba. It's a Hebrew word. It's used in Psalms 35, verse 1. So when the Fulani have bad interactions with the Oyo peoples, they say that they're shrewd in business. They say, no, we're not calling you Oyo. We're going to call you Yariba because you guys are adversarial. So the term Yoruba, which came from the Fulani term Yariba, you are literally seeing it right in the Hebrew Bible. Psalms 35 and 1. Y'all better throw some fire emojis in the room because I know for damn sure you ain't heard this nowhere else. I know for damn sure you can't open no book that's going to show you this. We take that same word, Yariba, and we run it through Strong's Concordance. And it shows you, it denotes to contend, to be an opponent, and an adversary. It's used in Psalms 35 and 1. It's used in Isaiah 49 and 25. And it's used in Jeremiah 18 and 19. And in all those places, the Hebrew term Yariba denotes someone who is an adversary. So the term Yoruba is a Hebrew word. I told y'all, tonight's lecture is entitled Hebrewisms of West Africa, the Linguistic Proof.
So, reading from Conspiracy to Erase a Nation, is according to the Yoruba's origin story, the tribe originally migrated from the Nile Valley, similar to what's been said about the Ashantis. This is confirmed as Yoruba culture has many similarities to ancient Egyptian culture. In addition, Yoruba religious tradition of Aduwa teaches that the ancestors of the Yorubas emerged from Egypt, not Arabia, as it has been speculated, leading some scholars to conclude Yorubas were Coptic Christians from Egypt. The Hebrewisms in Yoruba culture include circumcision, the division of tribes into separate families, and very frequently into the number 12. Of course, this is a reference to the 12 tribes of Yasharel. Sacrifices with a sprinkling of blood upon the altars and doorposts, similar to Passover, a specified time for mourning for the dead, during which time they shaved their heads and wore soiled or tattered clothes, belief in demon possession, purification rituals, among other cultural feats. Okay, now we're going to talk about the Ewe and the Gebe. So this is interesting to me because, you know, I'm in Ghana, obviously. So the Ashanti obviously are here. Obviously, we're going to talk about the Ga very soon. The Ewe are also here. And it's interesting because Ewe people, at least from what I've been talking to people around here, they kind of are looked down on by many people inside of this country, which again, this goes back to the perverse nature of colonialism, divide and conquer. You have a lot of people who don't know their real identity inside of Yah, their bloodline going directly to the tribe 12s of Yasharel, and even people who they regard as their enemy or they regard as lesser than them having that exact connection. Imagine if in a country like Ghana or in a country like Nigeria or a country like Togo, we have multiple Hebrew descendant tribes who are sometimes warring against each other or sometimes just looking down at each other. Imagine if they all knew, first of all, we are not inferior. First of all, we are not the downtrodden. We are not the least of these. We actually were from the actual tribes of Yasharel. Imagine the unity that would be felt amongst them. So this is why I encourage everyone, particularly wherever you are in the diaspora, wherever you are, if you're on the continent, when you have this truth, share it because it can heal, I believe, a lot of the wounds of colonialism. Now, it says that Ewe, talking about their language, Ewebe, is a part of the Gebe language cluster, which comes from Ethiopia, along with the Jin of Togo, the Aja of Togo and Benin, the Fan of Togo and Benin, and the Flerafera of Togo and Benin. They belong to a member of the Kwa family of Sudanic languages. Remember, I told you all about those Sudanic languages, which is a subfamily of the Niger-Congo family of the Congo-Kordofonian language family of Africa. The Ewe are said to have left Ethiopia due to slave raids where their community members were being sold as far as India. So this is very significant because this points us to the Arab slave trade. The Ewe essentially left the Ethiopia region during the Arab slave trade, as that's when many Africans were being sent throughout the eastern part of the world, and we know transatlantic slave trade, that's the western part of the world. So the Ewe, along with the Gebe, including the Aja, Fan, and Ga-Dangme, descend from the Yoruba. Now, this is something that a lot of people probably don't know. Yes, they all have their origins in the Yoruba. So again, these tribes descend from the Yoruba. You're going to see these Hebrew connections just continue and continue the more that you dig into this, where the interrelatedness between the Ashanti, the Yoruba, the Ga, you're going to see this interrelatedness repeat because, again, these are all the same people coming from the actual tribes of Yasharel. So it also goes on to say that the Ewe migrated from Ketu, a Yoruba town in modern Benin. Some Gebe returned and founded the Aja kingdom of Alada, Wahada, Popo, and Jakin, and later the Fan kingdom of Dahomey. In the early 18th century, that became a central location of the transatlantic slave trade. The Wahada or Waida kingdoms is notable for being a variation of Yahuda, and is even labeled Kingdom of Judah in the 1747 map published in England. So, of course, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this map. So this essentially points to the Ewe probably being from the tribe of Yahuda, the fact that they adopted this name for this particular place. So let's go on. We're going to talk about the Ga-Dangme. The Ga-Dangme, they have an interesting oral history, again, all pointing to Ethiopia. This is the commonality. It says, according to the Ga-Dangme oral history, the group migrated to Ethiopia's Gondar province, where the Blue Nile originates. The Ga-Dangme word for high priest, Nai Wu Lomo, even means priest of the Nile. Imagine this. So this is from Dr. Mi Akakar Minsa. He gives a further details about this oral history. It says, in 640 BC, the Assyrians attacked the Ga-Dangmes again while they were in Ethiopia. From Ethiopia, they traveled through southern Sudan and settled for a period of time at Same in Niger and even to Ilef in Nigeria. They migrated again in 1100 AD and settled at Dahomey, and later traveled to Hutsi and Togo, where they stayed briefly. From Hutsi, the Ga-Dangmes traveled to the eastern banks of the river Volta. From there, they crossed the Volta River at a place between the old Kongpong and Akuse and established settlements on the plains of Taglogo, where they lived till 1200 AD. Later, the Ga-Dangme migrated to the plains of Lolorvor, between the Lovor and Osukudu hills. The Shai occupied a settlement in Shai Highlands. The descendant of Eri, son of Gad, are believed to have been founded in Enri Kingdom around 900 AD of the southern eastern and parts of the midwestern Igbo land in Nigeria, with other tribes of Levi, Zebulun, Ephraim, and possibly more. In the books of Numbers, the Bible had made extensive references to the children of Yasharel, which include Gad and Dan and their children in Numbers 1:1 through 54. Ga-Dangmes also have Hebrew customs of circumcision, the Homowo festival, which is similar to Passover, Dangme's proverbs, which are also similar to Hebrew proverbs, as well as their Hebrew names are also documented by Mensa, including from the Old Testament, Nikole, Amasa, the Jane or Jane, Ammon, and Ashal. Okay, so moving on to the Igbo people. So similar to the Yabir of Somalia, who we spoke about last time, the name Yabir is Hebrew because the real word for Hebrew is actually Ibri, Yabir, Ibri. Same thing with Igbo. Igbo, Ibri. Igbo in itself is Hebrew. Going back to conspiracy to erase a nation, the traditional Igbo religion, Odiani, has a supreme being called Chukwu. Chukwu is the source of all things. He's invisible, genderless, also referred to with male pronouns, and is benevolent. He also punishes evildoers and evil deeds, but rewards good deeds. There are also lesser spirits called Akbara, who, similar to angels, can be approached. There's also Igu Oro, the Igbo festival that is very similar to Passover. where animals are sacrificed and blood is smeared on doorposts, trees, roadways, feet, hands, and earlobe as a seal to ward off evil spirits. In addition, evil eating patterns resemble those of the Hebrews. Eating pig is forbidden and considered filthy. Though male infidelity is frowned upon, it is considered an abomination when a woman commits adultery. Women who are accused of adultery are often taken to a community's central place of worship, where she is administered an oath, similar to the oath of drinking bitter waters of the Hebrews. However, the woman is to eat a kola nut from the ground that was prayed over. In addition, premarital sex, homosexual acts, and bestiality are all considered abominations. Now, God,
he gon' send his hand. Destruction gotta come, that's how he get us out this lane. The devil working hard, trying to get us out his plane. His sheep hear his voice, so he can't get us out his hand. We gon' trust the son of man, blow your wings, Father. Your kingdom coming, we just trying to make it in, Father. Rather we